But in our bed he was so fresh and gay, so coaxing, so persuasive, heaven knows. Whatever he wanted it, my belle shows. Though he had beaten me in every bone, he still could wheedle me to love, I own. I think I loved him best, I'll tell no lie. He was disdainful in his love, that's why. We women have a curious fantasy in such affairs, or so it seems to me. When something's difficult, or can't be had, we crave and cry for it all day like mad. Forbid a thing, we pine for it all night. Press fast upon us, and we take to flight. We use disdain in offering our wares. A throng of buyers sends prices up at fairs. Cheap goods have little value, they suppose, and that's a thing that every woman knows. My fifth and last, God keep his soul in health, the one I took for love and not for wealth, had been at Oxford not so long before, but had left school and gone to lodge next door. Yes, it was to my godmother's he'd gone. Bless her, God bless her soul. Her name was Alison. She knew my heart, and more of what I thought than did the parish priest, and so she ought. She was my confidant, I told her all. For had my husband pissed against a wall, or done some crime that would have cost his life, to her and to another worthy wife, and to my niece, because I loved her well, I'd have told everything there was to tell. And so I often did, and heaven knows it used to set him blushing like a rose, for shame, and he would blame his lack of sense in telling me secrets of such consequence. And so, one time it happened that in Lent, as I so often did, I rose and went to see her, ever wanting to be gay, and go a-strolling March, April, and May, from house to house for chat and village malice. Johnny, the boy from Oxford, and Dame Alice, and I myself, into the fields we went. My husband was in London all that Lent. All the more fun for me, I only mean, the fun of seeing people, and being seen by cocky lads. For how was I to know where or what graces fortune might bestow? And so I made round of visitations, went to processions, festivals, orations, preachments, and pilgrimages, watched the carriages they use for plays and pageants, went to marriages, and always wore my gayest scarlet dress. These worms, these moths, these mites, I must confess, got little chance to eat it, by the way. Why not? Because I wore it every day. Now, let me tell you all that came to pass. We sauntered in the meadows, through the grass, toying and dallying to such extent, Johnny and I, that I grew provident, and I suggested, were I ever free, and made a widow, he should marry me, and certainly I do not mean to boast. I ever was more provident than most in marriage matters, and in other such. I never think a mouse is up to much. That only has one hole in all the house. If that should fail, well, it's goodbye the mouse. I let him think I was as one enchanted. That's a trick my godmother implanted, and told him I had dreamt the night away thinking of him, and dreamt that as I lay he tried to kill me. Blood had drenched the bed. But still it was a lucky dream, I said, for blood betokens money, I recall. It was a lie, I hadn't dreamt at all. 'Twas from my godmother I learnt my lore, in matters such as that, and many more. Well, let me see. What had I to explain? Aha! By God, I've got the thread again. When my fourth husband lay upon his bier, I wept all day, and looked as drear as drear, as widows must, for it is quite in place. And with a handkerchief I hid my face. Now that I felt provided with a mate, I wept but little, I need hardly state. To church they bore my husband on the morrow, with all the neighborhoods round him venting sorrow, and one of them, of course, was handsome Johnny. So help me God, I thought he looked so bonny behind the coffin. Heavens, what a pair of legs he had! Such feet, so clean and fair! I gave my whole heart up for him to hold. He was, I think, some 20 winters old, and I was 40 then, to tell the truth, but still, I always had a coltish tooth. Yes, I'm gap-toothed. It suits me well, I feel. It is the print of Venus and her seal. So help me God, I was a lusty one, fair, young, and well-to-do, and full of fun, and truly, as my husband said to me, I had the finest quonium that might be. For Venus sent me feeling from the stars, and my heart's boldness came to me from Mars. Venus gave me desire and lecherousness, and Mars my hardihood, or so I guess. Born under Taurus, with Mars therein, alas, alas, that ever love was sin, I ever followed nocturnal inclination, under the power of my constellation, and was unable to deny in truth my chamber of Venus to a likely youth. The mark of Mars is still upon my face, and also in another privy place, for as I may be saved by God above, I never used discretion when in love, but ever followed on my appetite. Whether the lad was short, long, black, or white, little I cared if he was fond of me, how poor he was, or what his rank might be. What shall I say before the month was gone? This gay young student, my delightful John, had married me in a solemn festival. I handed him the money, lands and all, that ever had been given me before. This I repented later, more and more. None of my pleasures would he let me seek. By God, he smote me once upon the cheek, because I tore a page out of his book, and that's the reason why I'm deaf. But look, stubborn I was, just like a lioness. As to my tongue, of very wrangleness, I went off gadding as I had before, from house to house, however much he swore. Because of that he used to preach and scold, drag Roman history up from days of old. How one Simplicus Gaius left his wife, deserting her completely all his life, only for poking her head out one day without a hat upon in a public way. Some other Roman, I forgot his name, because his wife went off to a summer's game, without his knowledge, left her in the lurch. And he would take the Bible and search for Proverbs and Ecclesiasticus, particularly one that had it thus, "Suffer no wicked woman to gad about." And then would come the saying, "Need you doubt? A man who seeks to build his house of sallows, a man who spurs a blind horse over fallows, or lets his wife make pilgrimage to Hallows, is worthy to be hanged upon the gallows." But all for naught. I didn't give a hen for all his proverbs and his wise old men, nor would I take rebuke at any price. I hate a man who points at me out my vice. And so God knows, so many more than I, that drove him raging mad, you may rely. No more would I forbear him, I can promise. Now, let me tell you truly, by St. Thomas, about that book, and why I tore the page, and how he smote me deaf in very rage. He had a book, he kept it on his shelf, and night and day he read it to himself, and laughed aloud, although it was quite serious. He called it Theophrastus and Valerius. There was another Roman, much the same, a cardinal, St. Jerome was his name. He wrote a book against the Jovinian, bound together with Tertullian. Chrysippus, Trotula, and Heloise, an abbess, lived near Paris, and with these were bound the parables of Solomon, with Ovid's Art of Love, another one. All these were bound together in one book, and day and night he used to take a look at what it said, and when he had time and leisure, or had no occupation but his pleasure, which was to read this book of wicked wives, he knew more legends of them and their lives than there are good ones mentioned in the Bible. For take my word for it, there is no libel on women that the clergy will not paint, except when writing of a woman saint. But never good of other women, though. Who called the lion savage, do you know? By God, if women had but written stories like those the clergy keep in oratories, more had been written of man's wickedness than all the sons of Adam could redress. Children of Mercury and we of Venus, keep up the contrariety between us. Mercury stands for wisdom, thrift, and science. Venus for revel, squandering, and defiance. Their several natures govern their discretion. One rises when the other's in dejection. So Mercury is desolate when halted in Pisces, just where Venus is exalted. And Venus falls where Mercury is raised, and women therefore never can be praised by learned men, old scribes who cannot do the works of Venus more than my old shoe. These in their dotage sit them down to frowse, and say that women break their marriage vows. Now to my purpose, as I told you, look. Here's how I got a beating for the book. One evening Johnny, glowering with ire, sat with his book and read it by the fire. And first he read of Eve, whose wickedness brought all mankind to sorrow and distress. Root cause why Jesus Christ himself was slain and gave his blood to buy us back again. Aye, there's the text where you expressly find that woman brought the loss of all mankind. He read me then how Samson as he slept was shorn of all his hair, by her he kept, and by that treachery Samson lost his eyes. And then he read me, if I tell no lies, all about Hercules and Deianire. She tricked him into setting himself on fire. He left out nothing of the miseries occasioned by the wives of Socrates. Xantippe poured a piss-pot on his head. The silly man sat as he were dead, wiping his head, but dared no more complain than say, ere thunder stops, down comes the rain. Next, of Pasiphae, the queen of Crete. For wickedness he thought that story sweet. Fie, say no more, it has a grisly sting, her horrible lust. How could she do the thing? And then he told of Clytemnestra's lechery, and how she made her husband die by treachery. He read that story with a great devotion. He read me what occasioned the commotion by which Amphiaraus lost his life. My husband had a legend about his wife, Erphyle, who, for a god in gold, went to the Greeks in secret, and she told them where to find them, in what hiding place at Thebes it was. He met with sorry grace of Livia, Lucilia. Then he read, and both, of course, had killed their husbands dead, the one for love, the other out of hate. Livia prepared some poison for him late one evening, and she killed him out of spite. Lucia out of lecherous delight, for she, in order he might only think of her, prepared an aphrodisiac drink. He drank it and was dead before morning. Such is the fate of husbands. It's a warning. And then he told of how one Latimeus lamented to his comrade Arius that in his orchard plot there grew a tree on which his wives had hanged themselves all three, or so he said, out of some spite or other. To which this Arius replied, Dear brother, give me a cutting from that blessed tree, and planted in my garden it shall be. Of wives of later date he also read, how some had killed their husbands when in bed, then night long with their lechers played the whore, while the poor corpse lay fresh upon the floor. One drove a nail into her husband's brain while he was sleeping, the man was slain. Others put poison in their husband's drink. He spoke more harm of us than heart can think, and knew more proverbs too for what they're worth. Then there are blades of grass upon the earth.